too. It was such a wonderful performance. That was really special. And my name is Angelina. I'm a member of Regina Rex, and when I joined the group a couple of months ago, I wanted to join with an idea for a show. And I wasn't sure what that show would be at first, but I had just over kind of about a year ago, or in December, discovered string figures via a book I found at my mother-in-law's house called String Figures and How to Make Them, which was kind of an anthropological study of string figures done in 1904, I think. And it was a study of string figures kind of throughout the world, and I quickly grew addicted to doing them. I started by reading the book, but then found that YouTube instructionals were actually a lot easier to learn from rather than diagrams. But the best way to learn is actually with someone else who's showing you what to do. And so I learned about a dozen figures, and then maybe in March or April, Cabinet Magazine had a day devoted to string. Like they had a string theorist on hand, they had a knitting circle, and they also had James Ornoli Murphy, who I met there at the Cabinet event. And he has been not only doing string figures, but kind of innovating and creating incredibly complicated forms with them, things that I had never seen before in the limited research that I had done. And I was very excited to meet him and to see kind of what he's done. So if you'd like to take it from here, kind of
I'll try.
Go ahead.
First of all, I'm an old man. I grew up in Texas. I'm 5 days Cherokee Indian, and I grew up Indian, and that's where I first started doing string figures. I didn't really do much with them until I had to figure out a way to teach squirmy 11-year-old males who were gifted children on the Saturday program math. And it was very difficult because they were all over the place, and I quickly, the first day that I did the thing, I figured out that I had to do some physically oriented activities and not this kind of stuff because they were going to go crazy. So the second weekend, I did the Pythagorean ratios of plucked string. I don't know if most of you know what that is. You can get a couple of Coke bottles, big old liter Coke bottles, and tie them onto a string and put it between two knife edges and drop it over the edge here so that they go thong, and you can get a sound. And then you can take a knife edge and put it in the middle, and you get the octave, put it a third of the way, you get the fifth, and you can develop the entire do re mi, not quite what you do. And Pythagoras did that, and so the kids loved it because they got to pull and push and talk and do. And then during the next week, I had to figure out the next thing to do, so I figured out through that book that you had how to do Tin Men, which is a string figure traditionally made with opening A, grab, make what I call a loom. And you can see that there are two straight across transverse strings. And you reach down and you pick up the near little finger string, and you reach up and you knot over that loop, or you can do it with the other hand. You finish that weave, you reset your loom, you weave again, and this time you extend it and you get what anthropologists call tin men, but it's actually a fishnet. And it's a symmetric net, so it lends itself to permutation, so I learned how to do that, and then I taught string figures for the next 6 or 8 weeks the class was there. But in my normal classes, I had all the honors classes, but I also had, as a reward of the honors classes, I had the classes with the students who couldn't do that, who were going to flunk out of school unless they could pass a math course. And I had been a principal for a couple, 4 years, and so and walked back into the classroom because I didn't like being a principal. Good at it, didn't like it. So they let me do what I wanted to do, so I said, I'll try to teach them string figures, which is what I did, and they loved it. And they learned how to learn, because in order to do a string figure, you have to really practice until you can do the thing perfectly. You can't get an 80 from a string figure. And it works or don't, and that's just all there is to it. And so I began to look around and figure out systems of making string figures. And the first little system is with a 2-loop, not 3 loops, 2 loops. And it's on the index and the little finger. I play basketball, you'll have to excuse my hair. And it's very simple. You reach over and push down and lift the far transverse, and you Navajo the loops. The reason it's called Navajo because that woman who wrote that book in 1904 learned how to do these particular kinds of things from the Navajos. And so she called it Navajo loops, and it's been that way ever since. Turn your hands inside out, and you get 2 diamonds. Now, I'm doing it slow, so it doesn't. I will use what I call a power ring so you can see there's 2 diamonds. Then if you start thinking about it and playing around, I am left starting. That's the way most people start. I start this way. It's just the way life is. I start left-handed. So if I do my left hand first and then grab, touch my nose, which is a good mnemonic so the kids will remember it. Do the next one and touch my nose and turn it. And I have introduced some complexity into the system, then I do everything else the same. And instead of getting 2 diamonds, I get 1 large diamond, which I can straighten out if I wanted to. And if whoops, that's the wrong way. You have to pay attention. I do left hand first and then do the other hand. I get 3, except that my hands are not warmed up yet. My hand doesn't really work with it. Anyhow, so I'm going to do that again slower and more carefully. I'm going to rotate, rotate. Navajo, lift, pull, and I get 3 diamonds. And if I wanted to try to do my power lift, I could probably get those 3 diamonds to behave a little better, right? 3 diamonds. I can do 4 by twisting both. But the Osage Indians and Cherokees got 4 by reaching under and getting, and then over 1 pickup, drop, over 1 pickup, drop, over 2 pickup, Navajo, ha, and you get 4. And you see that this is holding itself here, whereas the 3 doesn't. I mean, the 4 making the twist doesn't. And I will just add one little thing. I'm just giving a little lecture here. If y'all want to stop me and ask a question, I figured out, I want the kids wanted to know, could you make 5? So I had to figure out a way. So I started my Jacob's Ladder 4, but instead of doing over 1 pickup, I went over 2 and picked up. And I found that I had stored 2 diamonds. So I can rotate and add my 3. And 2 plus 3 supposedly is 5. And sure enough, there's 5 diamonds. And I can do 6, 2 plus 4, 2 plus 2 plus 2. I can do 7, you know. And it quickly becomes an exercise in how to use a limp string and 2 places to pull out, and more complexity. How can you make it blossom? And that is, to me, the problem with string figures. The Ur problem is to figure out more and more complexity, but it still blossoms. Okay. Now, but that's a very simple system. That's two times, two loops. You'll notice that I just made this. You didn't notice maybe. I have a little Sabbath candle, my nice better half. That's what we use for Sabbath candles, and I use a nylon that will weld itself. When I first started, I crocheted. I crocheted this last night. It's a little straight, what do you call it, chain stitch that I dovetail the ends, and you see a little knot there if you look real carefully, and a little end sticking up. But it works like a charm. And before I found nylon, I had to crochet all my strings, and I would crochet 600, 800 a turn, which meant that's all I ever did, was to crochet strings. And now I do it this way. Anyhow, back to, I need a longer string. Of course, you can get all kind of colors, and the kids love it. Or they used to, I don't do it anymore. Okay. Now, a little longer string, and I go to 10 men, and I'll do 10 men again. And I call this weave the A weave because it is the one that I learned the first. And AA makes 10 men. You see, it makes a very nice thing. Okay. But you don't necessarily have to pick up the near little finger string. You can pick up the far little finger string under B, over C, push the near under, and then pull it over D, over and pull it under E. So you have at least 5 weaves. But I also know that mathematically speaking, the most interesting thing you can have is an inverse weave which erases the initial weave. A prime is nothing. B prime, oh, it's a C. C prime, it is nothing. Okay? So it makes mathematically called a group identity element. Anyhow. So I can do A, C, A, I can do more than 2 weaves, and I get an entirely different sort of figure, different complexity in the center, and it makes it interesting. I can vary the weaves by introducing what I call universes, try to get the kids to understand that there's another place that we're doing things. I would do A, and instead of doing just an A prime, which would erase itself, I would go over the far lower index and pick up the A and down flip it, and I would say A universe A prime. And that would just add a complexity, but it would be an almost resolved complexity, almost back to 0, so that it would be a more open situation, B prime, so that it wouldn't tie a knot. It would be a flower when you opened it up, so that you could have more complex things, and you could make what I call the almost collapse. So let's do a long almost collapse. C prime. A universe B. Now the reason I do, well, I have to explain that in a second. A, B universe C. A universe A prime. Now remember my question about how do you keep the flower blooming whenever you put as much A, B prime. might pull up so that you can see that the complexity actually can be seen. And if I use my old power left, I can figure out what I'm doing here without making a mess. Okay, I think I did it. I can take what is a very complex figure, and it would actually, if I use the longer string, it would actually blossom a lot more. But you have to understand that that's 10 complexities in there. So I have to really be able to have an open complexity, or almost collapsing complexity, so far as to open up. And I outlined 400 different weaves. So 400 to the 10th power is more than we can do here today. If you did 1 a second for a quintillion years, you might be starting to do that. But, so the question becomes, how do you make sense? How do you make sense out of all of the possibilities that you have? And this is a wonderful tool to get the students to begin to concentrate on what they're doing, how they can make sense out of it, how they can develop an ability to understand enough to make their own figure and show everybody else that they can do something they can't do, and that sort of thing. And after a while, they become past masters. I taught this class for 20 years, and not one of my students ever did not become a past master. They taught everyone in their family. They taught their friends. They had never passed math, and I showed them how to read a math book, and you've got little things that show you how to practice, and if you practice, you learn. They go in the back of the room and they read their math book and do math problems. And they do the whole 3 years of regular math curriculum in high school in the back of the room in the term. And then they go to college the next year, because they were almost all juniors and seniors, and take calculus, make an A, come back and testify to the class that what I was talking about was something which was really important. And what it is what you were speaking to. It's the ability to figure out a systemic approach so that an algorithm, a way of doing something to get an answer or to achieve something, an operation which works to do something. And knowing how to do that operation perfectly, how to mesh it with other operations intelligently, to do that with accuracy, and to remember what you have done, either notation or here, and to build on your understanding to become more and more proficient in what you're doing. That's learning. Anything you want to learn, that's the way you learn. So, but it doesn't seem that way to most educators. I want to tell you that I still have a dogfight whenever I try to explain to somebody that this is something important that they should be able to do in class in a regular high school in New York City as a public school. If I had not been a principal for 4 years and they let me run to what I wanted to do, they would have scolded me and told me either I did the right curriculum or I was out the front door. Except that I would take the most problematic students in the entire school, and LaGuardia High School of Music and Art had more than its share of problematic math students, and I would solve their problem. So the principal, after a couple of years, loved me, because all of a sudden he wasn't getting parents coming in and complaining about math teachers. Anyway, that's 10 minutes. I know I've got a couple more 10 minutes. I don't know how long I'm supposed to do this.
Do you want to maybe show us a couple more of your complex figures?
Well, I was going to. That's the 10-minute thing that I was thinking about doing.
Because
10 minutes.
these
I
are
will do a complex three-dimensional thing. Okay, I do that, and then I do this, and then I do this. Okay, then I do a and a complex super. Get this one. Oops, get that right. It's hard to do this in real time in front of a lot of people.
That's true.
But, and talk at the same time. You have to understand that talking at the same time is perhaps the most difficult part. I have to go get this. Yes. What is this one? See, there we go. And there we go. I don't know if this is right. I don't think it is. We will try. Because one of the marvelous things about this is it's so complex that if you can get almost anything, and it will be a fairly strange. You see, that's not the one, it was a C prime instead of a B prime, but that's okay. It's nobody has ever seen this city before. Here we go. There's it. That's not, but that's okay. Let me do something I know that I can do, and it's a little more astounding. But it isn't a 10-man figure. It is an Inuit figure. Inuit's Eskimo. And it also has a web, which is a tennis fish net. And I discovered how to do weaves and inverse weaves and to frustrate those inverse weaves and to teach that to the kids. And I found that I could do more than 3 loops. I could do 4 loops. And I developed a way of weaving which is transferring, it's actually putting loops up through twisting and untwisting. Like that. And it doesn't look like much. It's an iterative function. You have to do the same thing again and again because the more interesting long figures are visually more arresting if they are astoundingly complex. But you can be simple and complex at the same time. This is the 3rd time around in this particular algorithmic exactitude.
So each time here, you're doing essentially the same thing.
Yeah, that's the 3rd time. Now I'm going to just finish it, and I'll do basically the original Inuit fish net as a finishing on the outside of this. I'll get my fingers to work. And with a little upheaval here. It's a tennis net. But but that's essentially, you have to be able to have a complexity which lends itself to lifting out because that's a very unstiff medium we have here. So that's what you do. Isn't that cute? I also wanted to do action figures. I learned how to do a 5-point star. It took me 6 years to learn how to do a 5-point star. But I thought about anatomical reality. How the body open its pores because muscles just pull, much like this is the action. So, this is another Inuit neck figure. Yeah, but I have a double cotillion. I've doubled the two outside loops. Now do the first Inuit weave. Rotate the entire figure. And then do its inverse. And I'll show you another figure in a second, which is before I figure this one out. And then I have to do it again for this particular figure. It's like watching water run uphill. It's pretty boring. Now I have to finish that, and I will do basically a perversion of the Navajo weave. And the Navajo have figures which are very much like the Inuit. And one more here of these. And now I'm ready to release that information into the center and to lift it out. And you see that it's a complex sort of figure. But if I put two diamonds on the end of it, remember my two diamonds? And use a power lift, I'll straighten out the center here. I get a very toothy mouth. That does work, and it works by pulling in one direction. It's cute. And, I can actually, it will pick up. I can't do it by myself. Yeah, but that's a fairly good figure. A takeoff on that figure, actually one that came before, shows the beauty of the inverse relationship if you can control it. Again, it's an iterative figure, but it's a three-loop figure, a fairly simple three-loop figure. Again, you do the Inuit first weave, rotate, and then you do the Inuit inverse first weave. And you rotate, and you rotate the center. And you do it again. And then this time I won't talk so much, and I'll do it a little faster. And that's the second time. Sometimes you sing to yourself to keep a rhythm, because in order to be more exact, you have to get rid of the words and just let the melody take over the rhythm. See, I started talking this just the end, I probably lost my way. Yes, I did. Okay. The mouth is a magic figure. Usually, it will.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Hmm?
The experience of watching somebody do this often looks like magic tricks to me. You know, like there's a kind of set of movements that some you may understand, some you may not, and then all of a sudden this figure kind of appears. The experience of doing it is entirely different, because it's that point where you do kind of come to this muscle memory. We're learning it, and there is this, like Emily said, very steep learning curve at first, where it's kind of like, I do this, and then what, you know? And you have to do it kind of dozens and dozens of times until you get the rhythm of it, and until it does become a kind of knowledge that is embodied in your hands. And then at that point, you get it in that moment when it first appears, and you kind of got it, is a really exhilarating moment. But then, like, when you kind of come back around and try to teach people something, there's also kind of a rhythm to it that it's very difficult to talk while you do it, and it's very difficult, at least for me, to slow down to do it, because I kind of lose whatever internal rhythm that I've kind of established in doing the figure for myself. And so, in a way that, you know, if I think about trying to slow down the process of doing the figure, it's more difficult than kind of keeping a particular rhythm.
Yes, all of my students said that they were amazed at how other people had more trouble than they did learning the figures. And that's not the way it really is, it's just the way it seemed to them. They also learn patience. You notice you have to take the string figure apart when you can do the next one. Okay, I'll try to be quiet now. What I said before is you can't get an idiot. Okay, I did this right this time. This is, I call Cherokee 7 stars because it has those stars, 6 on the outside of an octagon in the center. The outsides are hexagons. But each of those is the result of a weave and its inverse, 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 and then the finishing moves. And it's really that simple and that complex. But when a student gets a figure like this over their heads first time, they have an epiphany of some huge power which feeds into their self-confidence in a way which is astounding. What they feel about themselves and how they can tackle any problem, anything you throw at them. Can't be any harder than this, period. Anyhow, that's...
Thank you.
And I can make that. Look, I've got this book, these are my articles that I wrote for the International String Figure Association. You can buy them on the internet. On Amazon has my stuff. James R. Murphy actually has 8 of my books. Only one is string figures. You can pick up one of these things that talks about my, I have a place on the internet, Torus Flex. In mathematics, donut is a torus. So these are long, skinny donuts that you flex on itself. So torusflex.com is my website. And I have 2 dot torus flex and 3 dot torus, 4 and 5, and they have videos of my hands doing the figures. So, you know, I'll make at least one figure for one string for everybody who wants one. Since all I have to do is to weld it. Put the one out here and there for grabs, and I'll proceed to make more and answer any questions and take one of these, look at my book. That's all I have to say.
show, which was inspired by some of the parameters of string controls, like repetition and hand-made gestures and kind of references to things larger than what's going on right here. And I'd be happy to talk to you about the show too. And otherwise, thank you all for coming. Thank you.